back in January 2018, something pretty incredible happened. One of the UK's biggest construction companies, I mean a real giant, the kind that builds our schools, our hospitals, our railways, just vanished. Poof, gone. So today, we're diving into the story of Carillion's £5 billion collapse and figuring out how it all came crashing down.
Okay, so to really get why this was such a huge shock, you've got to understand the sheer scale we're talking about. Carillion wasn't just another big company. No. It was woven into the fabric of British public life. They were building the stuff we all rely on every single day. And then, like a light switch, it was gone. Almost overnight.
And this chart, wow, it just perfectly captures the speed of this implosion. I mean, look at it. For years and years, Carillion was this stable, reliable, blue-chip stock. You know, the kind of thing you'd think was a safe bet. Then, July 2017 hits, and the floor just completely gives out. The share price doesn't just drop, it falls off a cliff. A company that looks solid as a rock becomes totally worthless in just a few months. It's wild.
Right away, this was not seen as just some unfortunate business failure. Oh no! As you can see from this fiery quote from a member of parliament, it was immediately framed as a massive scandal. A story of, well, same old story, same old greed. People were pointing fingers, talking about corporate greed and a complete, catastrophic failure of oversight.
So this really brings us to the big question, right? How on earth does a company this massive, we're talking 43,000 employees, billions in revenue, just go into liquidation? How does it cease to exist? To find the answer, we've got to pull back the curtain and see what was really going on.
So, to find the cracks in the foundation, we first have to look at the perfect, pristine public image that Carillion showed the world. On the surface, I mean, this looked like a model corporation. Everything seems squeaky clean.
Just look at this number, £5.2 billion. That was their revenue in 2016, their last full year. That is a staggering amount of money. It suggests a really healthy, thriving business, or, so it seemed. And this really highlights the huge gap between what they said and what they did. The company's official values were, we care and we deliver. Really nice, right? But as we're about to find out, the reality behind the scenes, well, it was something else entirely.
And this is exactly why this mattered so much. This wasn't just some private company failing and shareholders losing money. No, this was a key government partner. Its collapse left critical public projects, we're talking new hospitals, schools, half-finished and in total chaos.
Okay, so now we start digging. Because beneath that shiny surface, the company's own financials were telling a completely different story. There were huge red flags, hidden in plain sight, right there on their balance sheet.
And here's the first one, £1.5 billion. That was the value of something called goodwill on Carillion's books in 2016. Now get this, that number made up over a third of the company's entire asset base. So what exactly is goodwill?
Well, it's a bit of a funny thing. Goodwill isn't a physical asset, like a building or a truck. It's an imaginary number on a balance sheet. It basically represents the extra money you pay to buy another company above and beyond what its physical stuff is worth. It's a bet, really. A bet that the new combined business is going to be a huge success. The big problem, though? If that bet goes wrong, that asset can suddenly become worthless, leaving this massive gaping hole in your finances.
And where did all this goodwill come from? A massive, debt-fueled shopping spree. Carillion went out and bought up a bunch of its competitors. But the promised benefits, what the business world calls synergies, they just never showed up. In fact, one of their big acquisitions, a company called IGA, just bled money for years. They weren't buying profits, they were buying problems.
Okay, now we get to the real heart of the deception. Because Carillion didn't just have a bad strategy. That's one thing. But they also used some pretty complex accounting tricks to hide just how bad things were getting.
So let's talk about something called percentage of completion accounting. See, for these huge, multi-year construction projects, companies don't wait until the very end to say they've made money. They book the revenue as they go, based on how complete they estimate the project to be. And that word, estimate, that is the key. It's totally a judgment call, and it gives the people in charge enormous power to paint whatever picture they want, whether it matches reality or not.
And the Royal Liverpool Hospital project is the perfect, jaw-dropping example of this. So check this out. Step 1. Carillion initially estimates they'll make a 3.5% profit. Okay.
Step 2. Even though the project hits a ton of delays, management actually increases the profit estimate to 5.5%. Then Step 3, an external review finds the project isn't making a profit at all. It's actually facing a massive 12.7% loss. And what does management do? Step 4, they just ignore the review and book a 4.9% profit in their official accounts anyway. That, right there, is how you turn a real-world disaster into a fake paper profit.
But wait, there's more. Here's another clever little trick they used. They had this program to pay their suppliers early, using a bank to front the cash. Now that sounds an awful lot like a bank loan, right? It's debt. But instead of classifying it as bank debt, they called it trade payables, just money owed to suppliers. And that simple switch, that little bit of wordplay, hid nearly £500 million of borrowing. It made the company look way less indebted than it actually was.
So when the truth finally started coming out, it wasn't a slow leak, it was a flood. The dam just completely burst. And you have to understand, this collapse wasn't the fault of just one person or one bad decision. It was a total, systemic breakdown of everything.
This timeline of the final 6 months is just breathtaking. It shows how fast everything came undone. Okay, so in March 2017, their annual report is published with a clean bill of health. Everything's fine. Then, just 4 months later, in July, boom, a shocking £845 million contract write-down is announced and the CEO is fired. 2 months later in September, another £200 million write-down and the new finance director is fired. By November, there's a third profit warning and the company is breaking its agreements with its lenders. It was just a rapid, completely uncontrolled demolition.
So who's to blame for all this? Well, failure number one has to be management and their aggressive accounting. They actively chose to paint this rosy picture that just wasn't true, turning real losses into fake profits and hiding massive amounts of debt. It seems pretty clear they prioritized their own bonuses over the long-term health of the company. Then we have failure number two, the board of directors. Look, their entire job was to provide oversight, to challenge the executives, to ask the tough questions. They were supposed to be the adults in the room. But instead, they just seem to have accepted all the optimistic forecasts and signed off on the misleading accounts, no questions asked. And finally, failure number three. The supposed watchdog failed. KPMG had been Carillion's auditor for 19 years. 19! They were paid millions of pounds to make sure the books were accurate and fair. But year after year, they just gave the company a clean bill of health, failing to seriously challenge the very risks that, in some cases, they themselves had pointed out. When you add it all up, the collapse of Carillion wasn't just about a business that ran out of money. It was a complete top-to-bottom breakdown of the entire system of corporate governance, all the checks and balances that are supposed to protect employees, pensioners, and taxpayers. And that leaves us with the most important and maybe the most troubling question of all. What, really, is stopping this from happening all over again?